So Conor Benn has just avenged his loss to Chris Eubank Jr. by one-sided decision. He controlled the pace, threw more punches, landed more punches, and dropped Eubank twice at the end of the fight. And all of a sudden, Conor Benn's stock is way up, and people are talking about potential matchups for him. So what I'm going to do is something I don't do as much as I used to. I'm going to go through every single potential opponent for Conor Benn from 147 to 154 and rank them based on their chances of beating him. I think the tiers speak for themselves, so the first fighter I'm going to talk about is Ryan Garcia. I'm going to put Ryan Garcia in the close fight 50-50 tier. Now, the thing with Ryan Garcia is obviously his stock is way down after the Rolly Romero loss. He was doing well in that fight in moments, but eventually just sort of shit himself and stopped throwing punches, partly because Romero himself put on a surprisingly disciplined performance. And Conor Benn also did put on a surprisingly disciplined performance last night versus Eubank Jr. One of Benn's issues in his career has been his recklessness, so to see him improve on that is a great sign. But at the same time, he is very defensively flawed. He gets away with it because he's very durable and has lots of heart. Ryan Garcia is someone who would find those openings. At the end of the day, for all his faults, Ryan is a really, really good counter-puncher, and he's got one-punch power at the same time. His check left hook is wickedly fast, and we saw Eubank land that a few times in both fights. But will Benn's overwhelming offense simply prove to be too much? It is hard to tell, and it's why I've put him in 50-50. I think it's a fight where Ryan has to be completely switched on, like he was versus Fortuna, in which case I'd pick him. But otherwise, if we see a gun-shy version of Ryan, I would pick Conor. And that's going to take us to the will win tier, where we're going to talk about Devin Haney. Now, Devin Haney gets a lot of stick from fans, obviously, for many reasons, personality-wise, entertainment-wise, etc, etc. But pure technical boxing-wise, he's multiple levels above Conor Benn. It's simply a case of does he get hit and does his durability hold up. We are essentially going to find out next weekend versus Brian Norman Jr. if he's cut out for 147. I personally do think he's going to beat Brian Norman Jr. and by extension going to beat Conor Benn. Haney would land an unbelievable amount of jabs on his face. Moving on to someone who people may consider the better Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson. Now obviously the weights are completely off for this fight. It's a fight that's most likely not going to happen. Benn just fought at 160. Shakur is still at 135. But let's imagine Benn is back at 147 and Shakur does a 2-division jump to face Benn. I think even though there is a clear size and power difference, Shakur would clearly win this fight. I think he is that level of boxer where he's so defensively sound, he can just deal with a boxer of that size. Coming from the lower weights, the shot selection and accuracy of Conor Benn is going to be a massive downgrade from what Shakur is used to from the guys like Valdez, Conceição, Joe Gonzalez, even This Zepeda. Is a fight where the 10% chance is basically just a big lucky punch. And that's going to take us to the first fighter that I'm going to pick Conor Benn to beat, Mario Barrios. Now this is the most realistic fight thus far. Barrios is a title holder at 147 and also the most beatable. Barrios is basically your standard good opponent. He's world level, he's decent, but anyone with that extra level of spite or talent does seem to be able to beat him. He's got the unfortunate combination of not being too difficult to find, being easily pushed backwards, and not having much grit either. Mario Barrios versus Manny Pacquiao looks like a sparring session. I think if Barrios pressed himself more, asserted himself, he could have won that fight much more clearly. He had moments where he'd hurt Pacquiao with a body shot and then just not follow up. The only thing Barrios has going for him in this matchup versus Benn is his jab. He does have a better jab than Benn. Benn will have to eat a few counters on his way in. But overall, I do think Benn would beat him quite clearly. Speaking of Manny Pacquiao, our next opponent is going to be Manny Pacquiao in the same tier. Now, I was tempted to put Pacquiao in the no tier simply because I had this theory that if someone presses Pacquiao properly, they would get him out of there quite easily. Pacquiao's 47-year-old body can't hold up to that much punishment. But at the same time, I was thinking maybe Benn's going to be weight drained at 147 after coming straight down from 160. Pacquiao has lost his speed, but power is the last thing to go, and his timing is still pretty good. I don't think a vintage Manny Pacquiao counter left hook is completely out of the question if Conor Benn does turn out to be weight drained in their fight. But in any other circumstances, like at 154, I think Pacquiao has no chance. And that's going to take us to a fight that unfortunately may be happening next, the trilogy fight versus Chris Eubank Jr. I've said this before, I didn't even want the rematch to happen in the first place. The first fight was clear, and it was unnecessarily compromising Eubank by making him cut weight twice, when he already struggled and missed weight the first time. If he was to be drained again and given the same rehydration clause, Eubank would go in the no tier. But I can't imagine them making the fight happen again under the same stipulations, so that's why Eubank is in decent chance, assuming he's not weight drained again. I did make a video yesterday breaking down the second fight and why it was so one-sided. I do not buy the idea of it being fixed to set up a trilogy. That doesn't make any sense at all. Why would you script that fight to be as uneventful as it was and as conclusive as it was? There are doubts in my mind that Eubank even has it in him to fight again after that performance. They already struggled to sell the second fight as it was, There is no demand for a trilogy. I really hope it doesn't happen. I think we know Ben would win, unless it took place at 168. And that's going to take us all the way back up to the top with bakhram Murtazaliev. Now, Murtazaliev's next fight has just been announced versus Josh Kelly, and I think he's going to break down and stop Josh Kelly. If a smaller, less powerful, less skilled Dave Avanesian was able to break down and stop Josh Kelly, I think bakhram Murtazaliev can. Murtazaliev is essentially an unwinnable fight for someone like Ben. Because of how powerful and durable Murtazaliev is, your best bet is boxing. And while Ben does have a jab, I don't think it's much better than Murtazaliev's. In fact, I'd say bakhram utilises it better. Conor Benn has a bully boxing style. He doesn't like to be the one being pressed. Murtazaliev will press him. He's much more powerful, much bigger, much stronger. And Conor would get chinned inside 6 rounds. And that's going to take us to our first fighter. In the no tier, we have Lewis Crocker, the reigning welterweight champion. Lewis Crocker is the worst champion in boxing right now. Not only was Paddy Donovan versus Lewis Crocker 2 an acceptable title fight, he shouldn't have even won that fight. We've seen Lewis Crocker outboxed on the outside and outfought on the inside. If Conor Walker can arguably beat Crocker, Conor Benn definitely can. He's stronger, he's better, he's faster. Crocker is not a world level fighter by any means, despite the title. And that's going to take us to the best champion at 147, Brian Norman Jr. Now, some of you may remember I said I think Devin Haney's going to beat Brian Norman Jr., but Norman's above Haney in this tier list. That's entirely for stylistic reasons. Unless Devin Haney goes on to knock out Brian Norman, which I think is almost impossible. Norman is a bit of a nightmare fight for Conor Benn. I think Norman is quite flawed on the outside. He's got slow feet and he's not too good at cutting off the ring, which is why I think Devin Haney's going to beat him. Conor Benn, however, is not a boxer mover. And when it comes to defensive work and countering work, especially on the inside, Brian Norman is one of the best in the world. Norman's last 3 fights were versus pressure fighters, and as a result, they were hopelessly one-sided fights. Obviously, Cuevas and Sasaki aren't world-level fighters, but I do think Santillan is, and he beat the shit out of him. Norman would see Benn's entries coming from miles away, and I believe it would be a boxing lesson. And that's going to take us back down to the close fights here, Rolly Romero. This is a weird one because I think it does depend on how Conor Benn approaches this fight. I am of the opinion that Rolly Romero has gotten quite good. He's quite disciplined, he's hard to hit to the body, and very hard to hit with a left hook. Above all else, Rolly's defensive weakness is the jab. And Conor Benn does happen to have quite a powerful sparing jab, but he does put a bit too much force into that punch, to the point where Rolly could look to counter. But it is a difficult one, and a fight that could end in a scrap. And that's going to take us back up to the will definitely win tier, Vergil Ortiz Jr. I think to put this fight into perspective, Conor Benn is a very good scrapper and very durable, but I don't think he's particularly close to being elite. I don't think anything he does is impressive technically. It's more so the violence and force that comes with it, and he does have good shot selection, distance control, etc. Vergil Ortiz, on the other hand, not only is he far better technically, he's also better in a scrap. Vergil Ortiz is a top 3 best pressure fighter in boxing right now. The only competition really is someone like Beterbiev, Benavidez, Martinez. Vergil Ortiz would do bad things to Conor Benn. Sticking to the same tier as Vergil Ortiz, we're going to look at Jaron Boots Ennis. Similar situation, is just a complete difference of talent. Boots is better in every single regard: offense, defense, outside work, inside work, mid-range work, footwork, stamina, durability, fight IQ, shot selection, reflexes, athleticism, jabs, power punches, body punches, counter punches, even power and size. I'd say Boots has the advantage. There's absolutely nothing going for Conor Benn in this matchup. And that's going to take us to the will wins here. We're going to talk about Sebastian Fundora. Fundora, I think, has developed quite well in recent years. There was a time where Fundora basically only knew how to fight on the inside. We saw that versus Lubin, we saw that versus Ocampo, and it was quite strange to see a 6'5" welterweight fighting the way he did. But since the Mendoza loss, and I think we saw it for the first time versus Tim Tszyu in the first fight, he's gotten really good behind the jab. He knows how to use his distance, and he's quite a capable boxer at the same time, and he can hit hard. The thing is, his distance hasn't got much better, he's just maintaining distance more, which is why he's not in the will definitely wins here. Ben does have a chance of chinning him, but overall I think Fundora would win on volume. Sticking to the same tier, we're going to look at Xander Zayas, the youngest champion in boxing. Zayas has been a highly rated prospect for the longest time. He's developed really well in recent years, especially defensively. He's a very composed, calculated boxer-puncher with good size for the division. And I do think he is far more talented than Conor Benn, but Ben's more proven and more experienced. The guy Zayas beat for the title, Jorge Garcia Perez, was coming off a massive upset win over Charles Conwell, who was really good, but obviously not a proven world-level championship caliber fighter. The logical pick would be Zayas to outbox him, but at the end of the day, it could turn into a firefight, and Ben could win that way. And that's going to take us to the remaining champion at 154, Abbas Barao. Now, obviously most people don't seem to know who Barao is, despite being champion, which makes sense. He upset an undefeated Cuban contender, Ennis, for the vacant belt, which was a really good win. Tellez was highly rated. Barão is essentially a workhorse. He works really hard in there. He lost a long time ago at the hands of Jack Culcay, but since then has been on a great streak. He's got a high guard. He's got deceptively good footwork as well. He can move quite a bit. The question is, if Conor Benn and Abbas Barão meet in the middle, who comes out on top? Now, Benn does seem bigger, more athletic, more powerful, but I do think Barão is technically better with what he does. It may simply come down to durability, and they're both very durable. It may go to a very close decision that Benn wins because he's the A side. Moving on to another fighter who won last night, we have Jack Catterall. Now, Catterall recently changed trainers and is now working with Bozy Ennis, who also trains Boots Ennis, as well as Stephen Fulton, Andy Cruz. It's a great gym they've got over there, and as a result, Catterall looks much better offensively. He seems to put much more thud into his counters and his jab, and is definitely technically superior to Conor Benn. He's just not as talented as the guys in the top tier to put him up there. He is still viable to getting outworked, especially in late rounds, but overall I do think Catterall would jab, stick, counter and move versus Benn to a decision. And that's going to take us to our final pick in the 50-50 tier, Errol Spence Jr. This is a really difficult fight to predict because we have no idea how Errol Spence looks when he comes back. If we imagine an in-form prime unified champion Errol Spence Jr., obviously there's no question who wins, but since we know for a fact that he's took all that damage versus Terence Crawford, he's been out of the ring for almost 3 years now. He's been in and out of negotiations for about 2 years now, so we've got no idea whether he's actually motivated to fight or not. I'm inclined to believe he isn't. And while Conor Benn definitely isn't elite level, he's definitely a handful to come back to after 2 years out of the ring. So if I was Spence, I would take a tune-up fight and then come back in and see how he does. Because how he does versus Benn may entirely depend on how his durability holds up. And anyway, that's going to do it for the video. Just a quick fire some fighters I've not mentioned yet that I can't be bothered to give an actual breakdown for. Brandon Adams, Sergey Bohachuk and Jesus Ramos would go and will win. Erickson Lubin would go between no and decent chance. Teofimo Lopez would go and will win. Terence Crawford would obviously go above the highest tier. Pat McCormack would go and will win. Rohan Polanco would go and will win. Paddy Donovan in decent chance. And that is going to do it for the video. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Goodbye.